All right, so I'll just start with a brief self-introduction. So my dad's Taiwanese, my mom's English. I was born in England. I came to Taiwan when I was 4 months old and studied in Taiwan, went to ordinary 国立小学, and then went back to England when I was 13 years old. So I continued to study in England until I finished university. I went over to Canada and studied a few years in Canada. And then I worked in China for about 10 years before coming back to Taiwan. So our chef included a photo of my family. So there's me, my wife, and my daughter, who is 10 years old, and my son, who is 2. So my son, he speaks more Chinese than English, but it's mostly limited to Mama Yao. Or 不要, 不要, 不要. Anyway, so he hasn't quite mastered the skill of interpretation yet. But my daughter is fairly good when it comes to doing basic interpretation. So sometimes I speak in English and she translates into Chinese. But I do need to help her out a little bit from time to time. All right, so interpretation in the age of AI. Let me just give this qualifier. I'm not a professional interpreter or translator. I'm what you could consider an amateur, but I have been doing interpretation since probably when I was about 16, 17 years old, simply because I was in Taiwan at the time, and whenever there were foreigners who would come and give talks, then oftentimes I was the only person in the room who could translate. So I didn't do a very good job. The first time I translated at a large conference was, I think I was about 18 years old, and my dad was the one who'd be invited, but he had something else going on, and so he recommended to the speaker, he said, "Oh, my son can." And I'm like, "I can? Are you sure?" But anyway, so it was a 4-day or 5-day conference, and every evening for about 2 hours. So there were about 300-400 people who were attending this conference. So if you can imagine, like this 18-year-old who's hardly ever done interpretation before, and having to interpret in front of like 300-400 people. However, the one good thing was, so it was in the mountains, they're mostly indigenous Taiwanese people, and the organizer said to me, "Hey, don't worry, none of them really understand English anyway. So whatever you say, they won't know that what you say is wrong." So I was like, "Okay, that's fine then." So I made many mistakes. So it wasn't the best translation, but considering hardly anyone in that room understood English, I was their only option. So whatever I said, they just had to accept. So that's sometimes the case. Sometimes you get to interpret in front of people who don't understand the language that is the source language, in which case then they don't know whether it's a good translation or not. But it's not always the case. Sometimes you're in a room and pretty much everyone understands both languages, and then it's really difficult, because they're taking notes and saying, that's wrong. No. Like, this interpreter is rubbish. So that's not always a good thing. All right, so as an interpreter, you are a bridge between languages. So interpreters, they ensure clear communication. It could be in diplomacy, could be in business, or in healthcare. I mostly have been working in the area of education, and especially within the context of the church. So I haven't done diplomacy. I've done a little bit of business. But to be honest, I'm not very good when it comes to business terms. There was one time while I was in Shenzhen, and I was invited to interpret at this meeting with several, I think it was American and British Chamber of Commerce. And I was meant to be interpreting for this speaker, but then he gave me his script just about half an hour before I was meant to interpret. And what I realized is I didn't understand quite a bit of what he was going to say. So I thought, this is a big problem, because if I don't understand what he's saying, if I don't understand the terms that he's using in terms of business terms, then how on earth am I going to be able to interpret for him? So I had half an hour, and it was over 10 years ago. It was 20, yeah, it was about 20 years ago. So it was a long time ago, and I was fresh out of college at the time. And there wasn't Google Translate. So no Google Translate at the time. And I didn't even have an electronic dictionary. So there was this script that was in front of me. And I was like, what is this term? How do you translate this term? And so I started asking the people who were around me, hey, do you know how to translate this term? How about this term? And so I was asking, all these Chinese who didn't have very good English. I knew because they were my students, my English students. And I was asking them, okay, how about this term, logistics? How do you translate that into Chinese? And some of them they knew, some they didn't. And so there's one word which is like, oh, what's that word? And then they realized that actually on their name card, they had a translation of the word. So it's like, oh, right, it's on your name card. So it's like, okay, good, at least I know that term. So I had half an hour to prepare, and in all honesty, that was not enough. And when it came to the actual talk, there were representatives from large companies in China, and I was really nervous. I'm not even sure whether or not I'm going to understand what the speaker's going to say. But fortunately, most of the time, he spoke in a way which was fairly clear and fairly understandable. But there were a few terms which I did not know the Chinese for. And so I kind of like just made up something, right? But then there were a few from Hong Kong who had good English, and they were telling me the Chinese term in Cantonese, but I don't understand Cantonese. So it's like, this is really interesting. So it's basically an interpretation from English into Mandarin with some Cantonese as well. So it was a very interesting experience. I would suggest that it's not a very good idea for you to only have about half an hour to prepare beforehand. Usually, speakers will give you the script maybe a day or two in advance, and yeah, then you actually have enough time to be able to work on it. And so all the terms which you're not familiar with, then you can have translated into English or in Chinese or whatever language first. All right, so miscommunication can lead to conflict or mistakes in critical situations. And in my case, then yeah, there was definitely miscommunication. Fortunately, there were a few in the room who could help me, at least correct the miscommunication part. All right, types of interpretation. There's a simultaneous, I guess many of you already know all this already, so I'll just go through it very quickly. Simultaneous real-life translation, done at UN conferences. This is something which I have done occasionally. Just a couple months ago, I was invited to be the interpreter at a conference here in Kaohsiung, and for 3 days, then I thought that we would have headphones and a booth in which you don't have to listen to everyone else, but no, they didn't. They just had a table on the side and with a computer and a microphone. So we're having to listen to the speaker, and also there were people around us as well whilst trying to speak. And yeah, it is a bit of a challenge. Consecutive, this is something I do a lot more, which is pause and translate. So in hospitals, in courts, in meetings. And for me then, it's usually in a talk like this. So someone's speaking in English and I'm translating into Chinese or vice versa. Actually, I prefer translating from Chinese into English. Yeah, because for me, then my English vocabulary is better than my Chinese, because I studied high school, university in England. And so on stage, then you are there and the people look at you, and pretty much you are the one who's giving the talk. So even though you are the interpreter, then for people who only understand your language, then they are looking at you as the speaker. So when it comes to consecutive translation, then it's very important for you to be able to speak clearly. All right, a day in the life of an interpreter. So simultaneous interpretation. Here's where you have to listen and speak at the same time. So you have to constantly be processing whatever you hear within a split second. You don't have more than a second. You can't ask the speaker to stop because the speaker is way up on stage and you are down below and they don't even know that you are there sometimes. So use in conferences, use in diplomacy, in live TV, and anytime when the speaker does not stop for you, they just continue. And especially if they're speaking fast, that is really hard. So there are a few times in which the speaker would be speaking at this stage and I'll be like, okay, anyway. It's mentally exhausting, requires very fast thinking. So because you have to listen and speak at the same time. And so that's why usually for simultaneous interpretation you work in teams. There was one conference, the only large international conference I've attended in which I was interpreting overseas. It was in Cape Town in South Africa. And what we had is we had 4 interpreters and we would take turns. Every half an hour we would switch. Yeah, so fortunately there were 4 of us. And so even though it was an all-day conference, then usually we would do about half an hour switch, half an hour switch. And so altogether about 2 hours a day. Yeah, but still, 2 hours of simultaneous interpretation is already quite tiring. Then there's a consecutive interpretation, where the speaker talks and interpreter translates. Used in legal, medical, or business settings. For me, then more of an educational setting. And requires strong memory and note-taking skills. So that depends. So if the speaker speaks in short sentences, then it's fairly easy in terms of remembering what they say. But some speakers, they don't. Some speakers, they might start speaking for a minute, and then they realize that, oh wait, I need to be pausing in order to let the interpreter interpret, right? And so they've already been speaking for a minute. So everything that they have said, you have to remember, try and remember, and then interpret. So usually what I do is I ask the interpreter, I say, yeah, could you speak in one sentence at a time? So one sentence at a time, because usually I won't remember if you say more than 2 or 3 sentences. So I ask them to, please, just one sentence and then stop. One sentence, then stop. One sentence, then stop. Yeah. The big problem is sometimes they don't speak in a whole sentence. They say a phrase like, yesterday I went to, and sometimes, because the grammar is different in English and Chinese, right? And so sometimes, actually, if they only give like half a sentence, it's almost impossible for you to interpret, because you need to know kind of like, who is doing what to what. Yeah. Anyway, so I find it easiest if they give a full sentence, not more than one sentence. And usually I don't have time to do any note-taking. Why? Because I'm on stage with the speaker. So I'm not there like this. No, I'm usually just standing here and looking. I'm usually looking at the speaker. So for example, if a speaker does this action, right, with his right hand, then I do the same thing, with right hand. If the speaker is like, and yesterday it was a beautiful sunset, I'll be like, 昨天非常美好的，不是美好的，昨天有非常漂亮的这个日落。Anyway, so something like that. So, and so whatever the speaker does, then you do the same thing. Other types of interpretation. Whisper. This is when in a, say, classroom like this, and there's maybe only 1 or 2 who don't understand. And so then you might sit next to the person and just whisper into their ear the translation. So it could be usually no more than about 3 or 4 people, because 3 or 4 people is the maximum size to which you can actually be whispering into their ear. Or as a sight interpretation, this is a reading and translating documents aloud. So there was some time for a period of time, then what I would do is I'll give a talk, in Chinese using an English script. And it wasn't very good. In fact, it was really bad. But because I didn't have the script in Chinese, but the audience only understood Chinese. And so I'd be reading in English and then translating it word for word into Chinese. But usually it tends to be much slower, and yeah, it's hard for you to be able to give a good talk that way. Then relay, used when translating rare languages. So for example, then you translate from maybe the local language into French and then into English. Or from English into French and into the local language. Because some small languages then, for example, if you don't understand French, right? But then there's one translator that only understands the local language in French. So you have to go from one language to the next and then to the next. And sometimes, I think there have been some conferences in which it's gone from one language to the next to the next to the next, like 4 different languages that it translates into. So usually it takes a very long time. All right, the hardest parts of interpretation. Number one, language barriers. Idioms, humor, and slang don't always translate. I remember there was one time when this American, he told a joke which I knew would not translate into Chinese. So I was like, oh my goodness, he's telling this joke, but no one's going to get the joke in Chinese because it just doesn't translate. So what I said to everyone, I said, the speaker just told a joke, so can you all laugh? And so everyone laughed because I asked him to. But the speaker, he guessed that I hadn't translated what he just said, and instead I just asked the audience to laugh. So he asked me, did you just ask them to laugh? I said, yeah, because they wouldn't have understood your joke. Yeah. Anyway, so that's a problem with idioms and with humor. For example, in English, you say it's raining cats and dogs. Right? What does that mean? So if you translate that literally, then you say it's a 下猫下狗. What? No, it means it's raining really hard, right? And in Chinese, then there are a lot of 成语. And 成语are very hard to translate into English. Because sometimes, it's just, you sort of understand what it means, but it's very hard for you to explain what it means, and even harder for you to translate into another language. Accents, dialects, and fast speakers definitely add difficulty. There's one time when there was, I was translating for a group in, I think it was somewhere in China, probably in Shanghai or somewhere. And the local, he spoke Mandarin, but with a very strong local accent. And so it's very hard for me to understand, simply because he wasn't really speaking proper Chinese or proper Mandarin. And so most of the time I just had to guess what he was saying. But sometimes that's the best you can. So I hear something and you guess that probably what they're saying is this, and then you make something up. Technical terms, medical, legal, business require extra study. So that's where translators or interpreters, they oftentimes have to spend a lot of time just reading material, medical, legal, business, whatever it may be, just to make sure that you know all the terms. Because those terms are very specific and they have very exact equivalents in Chinese or whatever language it is. Thinking and talking at the same time. This is for simultaneous interpretation. So you have to listen, you have to process and translate instantly. You have no time to think, basically. And you don't have any time to correct yourself if you get it wrong either, which is a bit of a problem sometimes. Mentally exhausting over long hours, so that's why usually you only do it for about half an hour at the time. And then 3, emotional and mental stress. So translating sensitive topics. For example, if you're in a context in which you are translating for someone who has experienced war, then they might tell you stories of death, of suffering. for refugees especially, for what they have to give an account of what they experienced, because they are being assessed whether or not they are truly refugees or not. And so some of the stories that they might tell could be very stressful. Medical cases in which the situation might be really serious, and so you have to translate for the family and tell them that chances are is that your loved one will probably die, and that can be very stressful as well. And staying neutral, even in emotional situations. There was one time when I did not do a very good job. So I was invited to interpret for this well-known speaker, and we were having dinner together. And so one of those present, he started telling a story that was making fun of the host who had invited all of us. And so I'm interpreting this story as making fun of the host. But the problem is that I found it really funny, so I started laughing, which wasn't very good, because what it means is that I'm laughing at the host who invited me in the first place. So anyway, just to say that even if it's a very difficult situation, you still have to remain neutral. And so best thing is for you not to start laughing. Instead, your job is to just translate. It's not to add emotion. Or handling pressure in high stakes environments. So these are all times in which you have to be, I guess, just purely focused on the task. Do your job. Regardless of whether people are excited, whether they are annoyed, angry, stressed, really worried, etc. You just have to do your job. Difficult situations, like speakers talk too fast, they mumble. Sometimes you don't catch the words that they are saying, or they change topics suddenly. All of a sudden they switch to another topic, and you're like, hey, wait, what are you saying? Like, I don't follow. So the problem is that if you don't follow what the speaker's saying, then how do you interpret, right? So that's where it's challenging. Poor sound quality in remote meetings. A lot of interpretation today is done online. But then there's a problem. If the connection is bad, if the person doesn't have a very good microphone, and so then you can't actually hear very clearly. Or pressure from business or political leaders to adjust translations. So a leader might give a talk, and they say something which is very offensive. Like, for example, they say, like, you guys, you're all idiots. So the question is, do you translate that, right? So sometimes I've been in a situation in which the speaker says something which I know to the listener, they will find it very offensive. And so I've slightly changed it, toned it down, so that it doesn't sound quite as offensive. Whoops. Wait. All right, how interpreters prepare for a session. So before a session, then it's very important for you to be prepared. Oh, goodness. Why are you jumping? Okay, first, learn key terms and industry jargon. So study specialized vocabulary like legal, medical, business. Don't do what I did. Just half an hour beforehand, you're desperately trying to look up all the terms. No, the best thing is for you to get the script a day or two in advance. If the speaker doesn't give it to you 1 or 2 days in advance, then, well, I mean, it's their responsibility. So just try to do the best job you can. But certainly, in most cases, then they will give you the script, and so then you can check the terms, just translate the whole thing through Google Translate or ChatGPT, etc. Review cultural expressions and common phrases. So this is where certain idioms, phrases, etc., which are common in the English language or in Chinese that are often used. Like what I just said, raining cats and dogs. Then these are phrases which you can just make sure that you learn, and if it's used, then you know how to translate it. All right, understand speaker and context. So this is where it could be helpful for you if the person has given various talks before. Then you research their background information, and you listen to any talk that they've given somewhere else. So that can be very helpful, because sometimes speakers actually give the same talk many times. And so if you listen to the person speak before, then you have a pretty good idea in terms of what they're going to say. So occasionally I have given a speech somewhere, and the person who's invited me has listened to something I've said previously, and I say, oh yeah, I remember that you talked about this last time. So identify potential challenges like accents or difficult words. So be familiar with the way in which the person speaks. That can really help you in translating. And then warm up brain and voice. So practice quick translation exercises. What I found is that in recent years, I've not done nearly as much interpretation as before. And so I've become I guess, you have to constantly be translating in order to keep yourself fresh. It's something which is a bit like any skill. Playing a piano or violin or something, you have to constantly practice. So what I find is that interpretation is the same. It's a skill that you have to constantly practice. And the more you practice, the better you get. And so before you interpret, then if you practice, maybe with a friend or something, or maybe just you can take a script and practice translating it. Do vocal warm-ups for clear speech. Tongue twisters are a good way in which you can warm yourself up. And number 4, check equipment for online and simultaneous work. Test headphones, microphone, and internet. Make sure that there's a good connection. And keep a notepad and pen ready for notes, because sometimes, especially numbers are sometimes the hardest to interpret. So that's where you might want to write down. For example, the person might say, and then we invested $50 billion US. Okay, what's 50 billion in Chinese? That's where I don't know how much 50 billion is in Chinese. That's where I usually need to write it down. So if they say 50 billion, I'm like writing it down. But for simultaneous translation, you can't do that. You don't have time to write down the numbers. And so what you do for simultaneous interpretation is that you have the numbers, like you have it in front of you. So 1 million, you have it written down. 1 million equals what? 100万. And then 10 million equals 1000万. 100 million equals 1. And then etc. So you have it all written down in front of you. And so if ever the speaker says like 50 billion, then you immediately know how much it is. Number 5, stay physically and mentally ready. So that's where you need to hydrate. Don't have too big a meal. There've been a few times when I've been at a conference, and before the evening talk, there's a really big meal. And the temptation is for you to really enjoy the meal. But if you are interpreting, then you can't enjoy the meal. So that's a downside. Because you can't do a good job if you have too full a stomach. You might be like, I ate too much. My brain's not thinking. And use deep breathing to stay calm. That's always a good method. And number 6, ask last-minute questions. So confirm the format. Is it simultaneous or is it consecutive? If it's simultaneous, then will there be the proper equipment there as well? And check for schedule or speaker changes. So know who you're interpreting for. All right, what makes a great interpreter? Good listening skills, able to understand fast, complex speech. So you need to be able to listen clearly. That's where I find interpreting it is really helpful for developing good listening skills, because you have to. So sometimes I find that I'm better able to understand people because I've been interpreting for them. Fast thinking, you have no time to pause, must translate instantly. And strong memory, you need to recall long sentences in consecutive interpretation. That's where, actually, I don't have a very strong memory, so that's why I always ask the speaker to, please keep your sentences short. Don't give too much information. Staying calm under pressure. So stay neutral in stressful situations, which I mentioned earlier. And good public speaking, speak clearly and confidently. A good interpreter has to be a good communicator. And quick problem solving. Adapt to technical issues, fast speakers and missing words, etc. Sometimes it's creativity. Sometimes you just have to make things up. But that's where you need to be familiar with the content. You need to know pretty much what the person is saying, and then you can, at times when you miss words, etc., you can guess what they would say in that context. So the more familiar you are with the material, the more familiar you are with the area of study, then the better you are able to do this. All right, AI and the future of interpretation. So, AI in interpretation today. Google Translate, ChatGPT. I'm sure you've used these tools. Provide instant text translation for free. So this is a big challenge here, because AI interpretation, most of the time, it's completely free. I guess you pay for the electricity, you pay for the internet, etc. But apart from that, then, well, ChatGPT, actually, I have the paid version. So I have to pay, how much, 600 or something NT dollars a month, because I find that it's definitely better. But still, once I pay that, just over 600 a month, then I can use it however much I want. And then there's AI-generated subtitles for videos and meetings. So yeah, we know this, like YouTube, it can produce instant subtitles for the videos that you upload. And so this is what we have today, and in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, I'm sure we'll have more. So AI is getting better and better when it comes to interpreting and translating. So what can AI do well? It's fast and cost-effective for simple translations. So yeah, we know this. AI can translate a script that for a human being might take hours in seconds. So instead of hours, it takes seconds to be able to translate. And it's very cost effective, because if you're going to pay for someone to translate something, an hour's work, you'll have to pay them a few thousand, maybe 1,000 or more NT dollars. But instead, then now you can get it for free using AI. So what are people going to use, right? Are they going to use a professional translator who's going to charge them 1,000 or 2,000 NT dollars for the translation? Or will they ask AI who can do it for free? And it's useful for travel, for casual conversations, and for business emails. So I use ChatGPT every day. A lot of the things which I talk about, then I have it in English and in Chinese. And certainly when you go traveling, you can just take out your phone and speak into your phone, and it can automatically give a Korean or Japanese interpretation. But AI also has weaknesses. It doesn't understand cultural nuances, humor, or sarcasm. And so this is where human beings right now still have the advantage, because communication is partially speech, or it's partially the words themselves, but it's also the tone in which you speak, right? It's also sometimes your facial expression. And so that is something which right now AI cannot do. AI cannot hear the difference between someone who is sarcastic and someone who is serious. And AI also, it doesn't really understand humor. So when you say something which is the exact opposite of what you mean, and we know this, right? So sometimes in language, then you will say something, but actually what you mean is the exact opposite. And so the person has to understand the context, has to understand the culture in order to be able to understand what you're saying. Sometimes when people speak, then the idea is that you read between the lines. It's not what they say, it's what they don't say. And AI right now, they cannot understand that. They can only understand exactly what you have said and a literal understanding of that. It struggles with live conversations and emotional tones. Yeah, so there we go. Also, oftentimes then, what I find is that I speak into my phone or my computer, and it's about 95 to 99% accurate. But then there are still times when it makes mistakes. So it doesn't understand perfectly what I'm saying. And that's just, because it doesn't do the voice recognition well enough. But it definitely does not understand if I'm annoyed, or I'm saying something for emphasis. It doesn't distinguish. And it lacks real-time problem-solving skills. What do you do if there's no electricity, for example? What do you do if there's no internet connection? Then you can't do anything. So, AI right now definitely does have its weaknesses. So, question. Will AI replace human interpreters? AI will handle simple translation tasks. So there's what's considered to be low grade, medium grade, and high grade translation. Right now, AI can do low grade translation really well. Really fast, really cheaply. But when it comes to medium grade and high grade translation, AI isn't there. And so that's where AI still needs humans to check the translation. Sometimes they can do a really good job. There's a professional translator who gave me a poem. So she was translating the speech of a politician. And in this speech, then the politician had written a poem in Chinese, and this professional translator wasn't quite sure how to translate it into English. And so she asked me if I could help. And I looked at it, and I fed it into ChatGPT. And it did a translation. I thought, that's not very good. And so I changed the commands. I said, okay, change the style of the poem. And after about 10 times of changing the style every time, finally, I felt that the translation that the AI gave was a really good translation. And so then I sent it back to this professional translator. And then she's like, wow, this is amazing. And I said, actually, it's translated by AI. And she's like, what, really? So I think she was thinking that she's a professional translator, but she wasn't able to do as good a job as AI could. But this is the key. The first 9 times the AI did the translation, I was not happy with it. So it still took me, a human being, to check whether or not the AI did a good translation, because AI does not know. When it comes to poems, when it comes to anything that conveys emotion, AI doesn't know whether it's good or not, because AI does not have emotion, right? And so you still need a human being to check. And so you have AI who can do the basic tasks, and that's a great news, because now translation or interpretation becomes so much more interesting, because the most boring part of translation, the AI can do. It's only the more interesting part that humans now need to do. So, in the future, AI plus human teamwork. AI assistance, human handle complexity. So that's where, as a translator or as an interpreter, you need to be heading for the medium or high grade type translation. You are the one who does the editing at the end. You are the one who checks whether or not the AI has correctly understood. You are the one who checks for culture, context, for sarcasm, for tone, for emotion. whether it feels right, whether it feels authentic. These are